hear me call it. It's essentially a new 810, more or less, right? It's going to function the same way. All of the money brought in under the consolidated general fund levy will be usable for any lawful purpose, just like 810 dollars, just like emergency levy dollars. All of it, whatever you bring in, is allowed for any lawful purpose. Now, the thing that changes there is, you know, the name is Consolidated General Fund Levy, CGFL. So the consolidated part of it is we're taking a bunch of levies that used to be their own individual levies, either general or special, and we're cramming them all together, and we're taking off all of the guardrails that used to be on them that said this money brought in under this levy has to be used a specific way. So that's going to present its own challenges locally that you're going to need to be aware of and manage. There's going to be a lot more discretionary decisions that are going to need to be made by councils because, for instance, the supportive public library levy is one of the levies that gets consolidated into this new CGFL. So previously you would have had this levy, you would have issued your, you know, up to 27 cents, not to exceed 27 cents per year, and that money automatically went to the library, right? Could only be used for that one single purpose. Well, now that guardrail is gone. Like you still have access to the 27 cents or a portion. It will become part of that CGFL, but now the council will have to make a discretionary decision as to what to do with the revenue that comes in. So if you still want to support library out of it, it now becomes a discretionary decision of the budget and not an automatic. Okay, so those are kind of the things that you're going to have to look at and moderate a little bit as you go. This is, like I said, an automatic process. It's an automatic calculation, and it will start from a base figure that is the FY24 consolidated general fund levy, and the levies that we're consolidating are right here on this screen. So you can see there's a lot of them going away. Most of the non-voted and voted allowable general fund levies are going away. Okay, so the big ones here that are getting rolled up are regular and emergency. Your 810 and your 27 cent emergency levy. Those two are going to be rolled together. A lot of you probably use the operation and maintenance of an owned civic center or rent insurance and maintenance of an owned non-owned civic center. Some of you may use the supportive public library. Those are kind of the big hitters here. A lot of the other ones are either completely unused or very limited use. So the ones that are you're really gonna have a difference on will be regular, general, and emergency, which always had any lawful purpose attached to them. They were always usable in the way that they're going to remain usable. And then supportive public library, which will no longer, like I said, have the guardrails on it. Same thing for cultural and scientific facilities. You have that one, you know, supporting museum district or anything like that. That will also have the guardrails kind of off of it, and it will become a discretionary spending decision of your council, rather than something that's automatically channeled that direction. So levies that you'll maintain that don't change at all are on this page here. So your 810 becomes your consolidated general fund levy. We maintain the operation and maintenance of a publicly owned transit, the 95 cent levy, the aviation authority, the unified law, and the support of local emergency management. All of those are maintained basically because they are levies that you levy for support of another outside agency, right? Or you levy under the auspices of another outside agency, and you hand off that money, and it comes from a different section of the code. And usually you have some sort of contract in those where you're giving those dollars. Liability, property, and self-insurance, which is your property casualty and your tort liability insurance, that one is unchanged. So it's not rolled in, it's still amount necessary for the year, and it's still usable to pay the premiums on your property casualty and your tort liability insurances. So nothing changing there. Same with employee benefits. All of those are exactly as they were. So police and fire retirement, FICA and IPER, other employee benefits, the ones that we collectively refer to as the employee benefits levy, all of those are usable at the same times for the same purposes for the same amounts, right? Amount necessary for the year. Now the tricky one there is FICA and IPERs. Because FICA and IPERs was always, you had to be at the 810 limit, right? Before you could unlock it. It was just like the emergency fund. You couldn't use it until you were at your 810 limit. Well, the 810 doesn't exist anymore. The question becomes, what do we do? Well, the language, when we reviewed it, the language on that actually says that you have to be at your regular general max. Well, your CGFL will still be a regular general, and you'll have your own personalized max rate, right? Not everybody's will be 810. Yours might be 1210. And as long as you're at that CGFL max rate, you can then use FICA and IPERs, whatever it be. Okay, so 810 doesn't apply anymore, but we will hem that in from use based on your specific maximum CGFL rate. And I'll show you how that's calculated in a minute and how we're going to control for it in the form. Capital improvement reserve levy and debt service also untouched, usable the same way. Capital improvement reserve levy still requires a vote of the people before it can be used. Still up to 67.5 cents, depending on how much you vote in. And again, debt service amount necessary for the year, completely uncapped, still remains exactly as it was. Okay, so all of these on this slide were completely unaffected and will continue to function as they always have. So that's the good news for you. Nothing new to learn there. All right. So let's talk about the consolidated general fund levy ratchet down mechanism. That's the big part of Division 2 of this bill and the part that everybody's nervous about. It's a ratchet down. Like that's the thing that gets stuck in your head. It is not a hard cap. There's been a lot of bad press and a lot of bad explanations out in the countryside, basically from the minute this bill passed. Nobody took a breath and said, let's wait for somebody who knows what they're doing to explain it. Everybody went out to their own different area and tried to explain this thing, which was a horrible idea. It's very complicated, and yet not complicated at all once you understand the mechanism. But the mechanism itself and the concept behind it are a little bit complicated. So what this does is instead of putting in a 2% or a 3% hard cap on your growth, is it basically gives you a shave by 2 or 3%. So if I'm growing more than 3% a year, but less than 6% a year in terms of non-tip taxable value. So that's the 2A taxable value at the top of the property tax page of your budget. If that's going up by more than 3, but less than 6, I get 2% of my revenue essentially shaved off. It'll be right around there. It'll be 2% of my rate, basically, that gets shaved off. It'll be a little bit more than 2% of my revenue. But if I was going to grow under the old system at 10%, or I guess I keep it in between 3 and 6, so at 5%. So if I was going to grow under the old system at 5%, if I kept all of my rates the exact same, under this system, I would instead grow at 3%. I'd still grow. I still get growth. It's still going to be above, 2% that people think is a hard cap at this area. I'll still grow 3% and I'll still get to do that. If I'm more than 6% growth in terms of non-tip taxable value, and again, it's non-tip taxable value, that line is 2A value. So we have to remove tip from the calculation. Non-tip taxable value growth of more than 6%, you get a 3% reduction. So if I was going to grow 10% under the old system, I will now grow around 7, right? So it's not holding me to 3, it's dropping me by 3. That's kind of the relationship to get in your head. And it's all predicated on how much did you grow in terms of non-tip taxable value between the current year we're in, FY24, and the budget year, FY25. Now, we won't know those numbers, those taxable value numbers, until January 1. That's when they're statutorily required to be entered in our system and into your budgets by state law. A lot of you will probably get them earlier than that, mid-December, late December, whenever the county auditor gets TIF figured out and apportioned properly. We're waiting on the rollback figure. This year, that's going to loom larger than in some other years because we've probably all heard about the predicted residential growth statewide. And the number I saw was 21% statewide, which is huge, huge growth. So that will have an effect on the rollback percentage and we'll roll it down lower. But low rollback percentage doesn't mean you're losing value. You're going to gain value. And most of you will gain value big on the residential side if you've had any kind of new construction starts. So don't fear that as much. If you're in a lower growth community, it means more to you because that will have a bigger impact on you. But if you're in a moderate to high growth community, you're going to still end up okay because you get to capture the lion's share of all of that assessed value growth. Because if you grew an assessed value of 21%, you're still going to capture 17 to 15% of that, depending on where the rollback is. Right? Rollback comes out end of October, so keep your eyes open for that. But the non-tip taxable value is the piece that it's factoring in rollback and it's factoring in the amount you have to carve out for tip inside your community. Those are the two limiters on it, but that's the number that we're going to figure. Good news is the system will do the calculation for you. This screen gives you the calculation as laid out in code, right? It looks intimidating. It's actually not that hard once you get under the hood. Because what we really do is we take this current year, FY24, all of those levies from your FY24 budget that got consolidated into the CDFL, you add up all of the rate, you add up all of the requested dollars, so that request with utility replacement column on the budget, add all of those together, and they become kind of your baseline. And we start our calculation from there. Okay, so the first part of it is we take your requested dollars from FY 24 for all of those consolidated levies added up. And then we divide that by the current year non-tip taxable value times the inflationary percentage. We figure the inflationary percentage by, did you grow more than 3, less than 6? Did you grow more than 6, or did you grow less than 3? If you grew non-tip taxable value less than 3%, or I should say 3% or less, because 3% is included in this bracket. If you grew 3% or less, your reduction percentage becomes 0. So you times it by 1.0, okay, or just 1. If you grew from above 3 to less than 6%, then you multiply your current non-tip taxable value by 1.02%. You're in that 2% limitation strata. If you grew more than 6%, you multiply your non-tip taxable value from the current year, FY 24, by 1.03%. That's going to be our factor, okay? We multiply that outcome of dividing the current year, your current year CGFL dollars requested by that percentage that or by that number that we end up when we multiply by the reduction percentage. We multiply that outcome by 1,000 to come to your new CGFL rate max for next year, for FY 25. Okay, so that'll give us a rate. This is the maximum rate we can have for CGFL. Consolidated general fund levy. So that's all of those levies that got wrapped together. Regular general, emergency, and all of those non-voted and voted permissible levies for general fund. Okay, so those are these levies added together. So that's consolidated general fund levy. You'll only hear people call it price CGFL because consolidated general fund levy is a mouthful. Okay, so CGFL basically replaces your 810. Okay, so you add all of those up for this year for 24, and then you work through the first calculation, and it'll give you your maximum tax rate for next year for your CGFL. Now that it's not your max city total, remember, you've still got that list of levies that were not touched, right? So on top of this CGFL that we calculate for you, you get your operation and maintenance of publicly owned transit, that's untouched, your aviation authority, liability, property, and self-insurance, debt service, your employee benefits, all of those are still on top of this, right? Just like they were always on top of the 810 add-ons, they remain add-ons and they remain untouched. So you get to use them next year, same as you use them this year. Okay, so this CGFL only figures for basically the new quasi 810 is what it does, your regular general dollars. Okay, yeah.
Just to be clear though, we're scaling down to 810 even though we're gonna stop using that.
Yep, that's the next example right here at the bottom of this slide. So good time to ask that question. So we take that max rate that we figured for FY 25, that max CGFL rate that the top calculation gives us. And then we multiply that by the budget year non-tip taxable values on line 2A divided by 1,000, like we would normally to create taxes. And that gives us the max revenue we can have from that, okay? The ultimate goal of this is to reduce over time to get people who are above the 810 levy back down under 810 for all of the general levies, right? That is the ultimate goal. So if I'm currently when I add my regular general levy, my emergency levy, and all of my permissible and or my non-voted and voted permissible levies, if I add all of those together and I'm at $12 per thousand right now, the goal over the next 4 years, the goal of this bill is to bring that closer to or down to 810 or below. Okay, so over time, you can see in the example at the bottom of the page, I did a 4-year example here of calculations for a city. Okay, city starts out with a value of $3.4 billion in non-tip taxable. They grow to 3.9 in FY 25. 24 was 3.4. FY 25 becomes 3.9 billion non-tip taxable value. That's a 15% growth percentage year over year. So that puts them into the highest strata, right? It's above 6. So they get a 3% reduction. You can see growth limitation in the middle, 3%. Okay. So we take their current CGFL of 634 in terms of rate and 21 million in terms of dollars. We apply that limiter to it. So we take 21 million divided by the 3.4 billion in value times 1.03 because they got the 3% limitation on them. We take that outcome, we divide that outcome by, multiply that outcome by 1,000. I'm on the wrong side of the equation. So multiply the outcome of that by 1,000 and we get the rate for the next year. So that's the budget CGFL rate at the bottom of 615. So they started at 634. They grew 15%, so they got a 3% limitation placed on them. That dropped their rate to 615, but you can see their revenue still grew by $3 million, right? Because even at a lower rate with that much more value, you still end up with more money. Okay, so they grew $3 million year over year, 2.5, I guess 2.5 million year over year, which is still an 11% gain. Okay, so you can see under normal circumstances, if they just rode the assessment, they kept their rates exactly the same and rode the assessment, if there was no law change, they would have grown 15%, a little over 15%. Now they're just going to grow a little under 12, right? 11.75 basically. So you're still capturing a lot of growth in it. It's just going to be reduced from what it could have been under the old scenario. That's kind of the goal of the bill. Now, yeah, go ahead.
Can you make that a little bigger or not?
Oh, zoom it in?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to zoom that in with the current. Let me get out of it quick and we'll zoom in. Whoops. On just the, I'm assuming you just want that bottom piece, right?
Yeah.
With.
I can see it fine.
Well, yeah, that's fair.
You're doing a lot of city budgets, Marla. No.
She's doing all of them.
I can see it, I don't understand it, if I'm being honest.
There you go.
I'm just glad I'm not either.
Okay, so in the room here, this might make it a little bit more viewable. Oops, I went too far. This might make it a little bit more viewable for you. A little bigger on the screen now. So this is 4 years laid out, and this shows us a couple of things. Number one, this calculation is redone every single year. It's not a one and done calculation. It's not like if you're above 6% growth in that first year, every single year you'll get a 3% reduction. We refigure it every single December, every single January for what it's going to be in the next budget year. Okay, so the prior year becomes the base for the next year, but the calculation is redone anew. So this is 4 years worth of calculation because the bill runs for 4 years with this ratchet down. Okay, FY 25, 26, 27, and 28 will have this calculation in it. Starting in FY 29, if they don't change anything about the bill, the hard cap becomes 810 for this CGFL. Okay, so instead of it being a calculated CGFL, starting in FY 29, it will become 810 hard cap. So if we ratchet you down over time, you know, from $12 per thousand down to $10 per thousand in 28, when we go to 29, you drop from 10 to 810. Okay, overnight. That's just the way it works under the bill. Now, will we get there? I don't know. Usually when they put those kind of clips in a bill, it means they want to do something else later on, and that will spur them to make a change because there will be, you know, an outcry from people who are at 13 going down to 810. And usually it'll spur more change. That's probably what is there. Hopefully we'll never get to that clip, but be aware that it's there. If they don't make any further law changes, that will happen in FY 29. Okay, but for a lot of you, it's going to go year by year. You're going to see a shift down. That's what this shows here. So FY 25, we redo the calculation. We start with the base that we had in FY 24, or in FY 26, excuse me. So we take our FY 25 base, we apply that to be the beginning spot for our FY 26 calculation. In FY 26, this city only grows a little less than 2%. So they're in that lowest tier, right? Because it goes less than 3% growth, nothing happens, 0% limiter on you. You're locked in place at the same rate you had last year, right? Above 3 to less than 6% growth in non-tip taxable value, you get a 2% limiter. Above 6, you get a 3% limiter. So in the second year, they're below 3%. So they get to have a 0% limiter. Basically means they just carry forward their tax rate, their CGFL tax rate into the new year. They were at 6.15 coming out of 25. They stay that in 26. Nothing else changes for them. Okay. So then we can apply that 6.15 against the next year's value, and we end up growing $412,000 on top of the 24 million we already had. The next year, we have another change. 1 second, I'll get to it. So in going from 26 to 27, we grew into that middle section, right? We grew 4.3% in terms of non-tip taxable value. So again, we redo the calculation using a 2% limiter, and that changes our rate from 6.15 down to 6.03, which gives us a reduced growth of like 2.3%, but we still grow $562,000 in this particular city in terms of revenue. So you can see every single year we redo the calculation, and every single year you get a different limiter applied to you potentially. If you're in that lowest category, we just carry your rate forward. That's it. If you're in that middle category or the higher category, we apply a limiter and your rate goes down. Yeah.
You may have said it and I missed it.
Mhm.
Is there a rollback set through this data table number? Do you have a
Oh.
rollback number set through this table?
Yeah, in this one, it was just a perspective, estimate of taxable value growth year to year. So rollback didn't figure into it because I was only dealing in taxable value. But you would have to kind of predict rollback if you wanted to get that far into the weeds.
Yeah.
I'm releasing. Sorry, I need to take a break for a second. I'm releasing, this week by Friday, I will release this estimator that I'm showing you here. And it will have a sheet in it where you just predict your taxable value growth, so you don't have to mess with rollback because that can become messy. So all you need to do is predict, look at your historicals and see where have my growth been in terms of taxable value. Look at your building starts, your building permits, and say, is there gonna be some giant influx of new construction or something like that that would raise my non-tip taxable value more than it has historically? And then you can make an estimate of change in taxable value by class in this tool. And then it will allow you to roll it forward like that, so you don't have to mess with rollback, right?
My second question was, what happens if values decrease as a result of an assessor saying the market's down?
Right. So if your values don't grow, if you decrease or you flatline at zero, your rate stays the same from one year to the next, because you're in that lowest tier. -1 is below 3, so you're gonna be in that lowest tier, and you'll take that same rate as you had in the previous year, and you'll multiply it against this year's value, and in that essence, you would get less revenue because you lost value. But that would happen under the old scenario too. You lose value, you lose revenue, period. There's no way around that math. Okay,
There's a question.
Go for it.
Here in the chat.
Yeah.
This is a great example for a community with a large taxable value. Has Ted done an example that would relate to the majority of Iowa communities? For example, a much lower taxable valuation, less than 200 million. Thus lower value increases have a much larger impact percentage wise.
Yeah, for this particular presentation, I just did one example, but you can kind of get a feel for how it would work at a lower rate of growth, right? So if I have a rate of growth that's between 3 and 6, I get a 2% limiter on me, I basically chop off 2%. So if I was gonna grow 4%, now I grow 2, right? And then your rate would be decreased by that amount. There's a bunch of different scenarios. The problem here is Iowa is so stratified in terms of rates across the spectrum. We've got people who, when I add up their CGFLs, they're at 14, and we've got people who are at like 5 or less. We've actually got people who are at 0, but I'm gonna throw them out as being kind of outliers. But when I release this, you'll be able to get a sense for your own community because it'll give it to you community by community. Yeah.
When you said that it changes each year, were you
Yes.
referring to like the 2 and 3%? Like that is gonna change each year?
So
Like what your growth rate can be in that?
everything changes each year. So your rate could also change.
Right.
So your limiter will change, yes. So you can see in this, if you look at the growth limitation line here, they were 3% one year, 0% the next, 2%, and then 0, based on kind of the re-estimation cycle. So each year that changes. So that means each year their rate could also shift.
I guess what I was asking is, say next year, is it gonna be, you're gonna be reduced by 4 and 5%?
No.
Or is it always gonna be the 2
Locked in
and 3?
percentages. Yeah,
Or
good
that-
question. Nobody's asked that yet. That's a good thing to think. They do love scaling things in the code. No, this one stays at 2 and 3.
2 and 3.
Hard through the 4 years.
For the 4 years. Okay, that was-
Unless they make a legislative change, that will remain the change.
Next year.
It'll be fine. It'll be fine. They have to deal with the surplus. That's good for you. That'll take some of the oxygen out of you. But yeah, it stays 2 and 3 throughout. 0, 2, and 3. I should give the 0 too, because that is also a limiter. But that's kind of that's where it stands right now. The thing to worry about there is less about a change to those percentages and that 8, 10 coming at the end.
Yeah.
That's the clip, right? And that's the thing to watch out for. I just did the 4 years here, but in the next year, you'd have that 8, 10 decision. In this case, this city is gonna be below, so they can go up to 8, 10. And in each of their 0 years, so in 26 in this example, and in 28 in this example, they grew less than 3% and they were below 8, 10, so they have the option to go up to 8, 10. So if you're a city who's below 8, 10 in CGFL by calculation, and you're less than 3% in growth from year to year, you can raise to 8, 10 at your own discretion, right? This is the max rate in any other scenario. So if I'm in 25 and 27 where I have a limiter put on me, then I can't go above 615 and 603 respectively. I can go below, So I could, instead of taking 615 in FY 25, I could take 6 flat, and that'd be fine, but I can't go up to 630. Okay, unless I'm in that year where I'm at a 0 and I'm less than 810, then I can go all the way back up to 810 if I want, or anywhere between, anywhere less than 810. So I could, instead of being at 615 in FY 26, I could raise that to $7 per thousand and still be perfectly legal because of my growth. Okay,
We have another question.
Sure.
If a city is at 810 only and has large growth years, so goes under
Yes.
810, is it accurate that they will not be able to go back to 810 until FY 20?
no, because it's year by year calculation. So if they had, let's say you're at 810 this year and going into FY 25 where you're expecting to have fairly robust growth, you're put into the top category. You get a 3% reduction placed on you, and it drops you down to $7 per thousand, right? Or, $7.50 per thousand is probably more realistic. So you're at $7.50 per thousand for FY 26, but then in FY 27, we redo the calculation. Let's say you come in at, 2% growth. And so you're in that bottom tier and you get a 0. Well, since I was at 750 to come into the year and I grew less than 3%, I can raise it back to 810 at that point. Okay, because I'm less than 3% growth, below 810 in rate. Now, conversely, if I go into that, if I started at $9 per thousand, had that big growth year, got knocked back 3%, and it dropped me down to 850. I go into that next year and I have a growth where I'm in that bottom tier, I'm less than 3%. I have to stay with the 850. I can't raise it up from there, right? It's not like I get the liberty to go up to another plateau if I'm above 810. You have to have both of those factors aligned where you're rated below 810 and you're at less than 3% growth, or 3% or less growth, I should say. 3% is included. I gotta remind myself of that. But 3% or less growth and you're below 810, you can go up to 810, and then that will be the base point for your next calculation. You have to be careful because that will also be a tax increase. And it might be a significant tax increase if you're coming from 6 up to 8, $2 per thousand in anybody's community is a pretty big jump. So you're gonna wanna watch that and not just automatically roll it up. But it's a discussion that you're gonna have to have. Okay? Any other questions before I jump slides? Okay. All right, part of the Division 2 changes and part of the Division 10 changes is that we have a new budget submission deadline. Okay, that was really the only big change to the budget forms and process of creating your budget. The next changes will be notification based. This is the big change to the property tax forms, and I'll show you in just a second what that looks like in our system. I'm gonna get past this slide and then we'll go to the system and take a look. So April 30 is the new budget submission deadline, not just for this year, but for all future years until they decide to change it on us again. We'll see. But that's for all taxing authorities. So if you also do a township in addition to your city, townships are also April 30 now. So every authority that taxes, that gives us a budget at DOM, April 30 is the deadline. Your emergency management or E911, you're still on your old deadlines because you don't tax. So it's only taxing authorities that got moved to April 30. There is also going to be a new mailing requirement where a notice has to be mailed out directly to taxpayers stating when you're going to have your meeting on the rate, where you're going to have your meeting and what time, kind of all the same information that you had in the max levy, but what information we're giving and what we're having a hearing on and how that hearing works is going to change, and we'll go over that in a minute. But just know that you're going to still have a hearing on the property tax separate of the full budget hearing that you're going to have to do at the end. But now the hearing on the property tax will instead be on the full tax rate, your full total city rate, rather than that weird disjointed max levy, just a piece of the rate that no one could explain properly, right? Even me. So it'll be a little better in that regard, but it'll be a little trickier because we have this new mailing requirement. The good news is the mailing requirement, all you have to do is provide the data. You don't have to do the mailing. County auditor is tasked with doing the mailing. Okay, but you have to have your data in our system by a certain date, and that date is March 15th at the latest. We want you to do March 5th because the county auditor has from March 15th to March 20th to turn it around and mail it, and their mailing services have told them, no way, can't happen, not going to be able to do it. So we're going to try to help them. If you could have it in by March 5th, they've got a lot more runway to get that out. So I would like you to have it in by March 5th, but March 15th is the statutory deadline. So that's the absolute drop dead date. We're still working on what happens to you if you don't have your data in by March 15th. You might end up with nothing. That's legitimately on the table. It was a little vague in the code language, so we're still getting a clarification on that. Hopefully that will not come to pass. So just make sure you have your data in our system. So basically you have to have the property tax page filled out and the new tax notice page that we'll look at here in a second. Those both need to be filled out in our system, and you have to have your notice proposed by March 15th. You do that, you're good. The mailing will go out. You won't have to do anything else with it. Okay, county auditor will take it from there. Us and the county auditor will take it from there. You have to do, like I said, you have to still do a separate hearing on the levy rate by itself. And that still has to be done before you can set your hearing date for your budget adoption. Now, the problem becomes our time frame on the back end got shrank. Even with the change to April 30 due date, if you think about the mailing going out March 20th, you have to have a hearing after that mailing goes out on the rate itself. And then you have to set a hearing date for your budget adoption hearing. And then you've got to have a budget adoption hearing all by April 30th, right? So we got to figure out a timeline, and I will release an example timeline as well this week of just an example of how it could work to get everything timed out correctly, okay? What we want you to do though is at least give 5 days between the mailing of the notice. So 5 days between March 20th and when you hold your hearing, so that the mailing has a chance to hit people's inboxes before they, or mailboxes, talking in email terms, a chance for that mailed notice to hit their mailbox, so that they would know where the time, the place, and the date of the hearing would be, okay? That notice will also include county and school information, and we'll look at that in a second too. But let's take a look quick at the budget changes in the system, okay?
Could you give a timeline example for those of us who only have meetings once a month?
You're gonna have to have a special, at least one. There's no way around it. I'm just gonna break that sorry news to you right now, right? You're gonna have to have at least one special. Hopefully you can time it out to have just one. So let's say you have your data in by March 5th. You set a hearing for around April 1st, like your first meeting in April. You do your hearing at a separate meeting, and we'll talk about all of that in a second, but you gotta have a separate meeting where the only agenda item is just the hearing on the rate. Nothing else can be discussed. So you hold that meeting around April 1st, you know, your first April meeting, so first week of April. Then right after that same night, you hold your regular meeting as you always would. And then that regular meeting, you set your hearing date for your budget adoption hearing late in April. And then you publish, get it late in April, get your hearing done, and then submit. That's the baseline for how this is gonna work. Okay, we may need to talk about shifting the deadlines earlier for the mailing. That's an option that might be on the table if this proves to be too tight, and that's my concern, is that this will, for the once a month meeting people especially, this is gonna be real tight. I'm not gonna lie to you. The back end of it, this is gonna be extremely tight. You're gonna have to do 2 hearings in April essentially, or a hearing in late March, and then one in April, later in April than you're probably used to. You're gonna have to have at least one special, maybe 2.
Our local paper once
Once
a week,
Yeah.
and then.
And that's
with
what's
the
gonna make it so
deadlines.
tight, is
And the
Those-
deadline, with the deadline.
and you're a week out from that, when you have to
Right.
have it submitted, absolutely. So you're gonna have to have a meeting for the hearing, set the new hearing date, get the notice to the paper in that same week, have it come out the next week, and then you gotta wait 10 days. And that's gonna be the trail, that's gonna be the kicker. So like, if you publish on a Wednesday, you have to have it in basically the Thursday prior, right? More or less, Thursday or Friday, depending on how loose the paper is or how good they are at jamming things in late. So you're gonna have to think about that timing and say, when can I get this to the newspaper so that it will come out after we've approved the hearing date? Okay, so you may have to put those notices in a little earlier than you're used to. Or you're gonna have to just have special meetings that will work into the time frame. It's not gonna be, like, there's no easy answer, everybody's answer is gonna be different.
And I might have just confused myself, but for that special meeting, it can be in the paper before the mailing comes out.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
And we'll cover that in a second in more detail.
Okay.
Cause I haven't even talked about that you have to publish a notice.
Okay.
You're ahead of me, but yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. So let's look at, looking at the budget piece of this, like I said, very few actual budget changes to budget form. Oh, yeah, is it not showing?
We need to share that.
Yep. Yep. Thank you for reminding me. No, I need to know. So I'm gonna unshare here for a second. And then reshare. So we're gonna share, this is our actual test system where we have our budget changes working right now. Now we should be able to see, right? There we go. Okay. So this is the property tax page. Looks very similar to last year, right? Not a lot different, except for this whole section in the middle here, the consolidated general fund levy calculation. We're gonna show you step by step all of the pieces of the calculation. We'll lay it out there so you can do the calculation, same as me. The system will do the calculation for you right up here. It's not currently, as you can see, it's showing a taxable value growth of 0 when we've gone from 4.6 billion to 5.5 billion. So I'm getting that worked out. But what it'll do is it will calculate the growth from year to year. It'll set the limitation, and then it will do the math on the limitation down here. So this is all last year. This is all next year, right? So this is all, I should say, this is all current year. So this is all FY24 information. This will be FY25 information. So what you're limited to will show up here under the CGFL max rate, CGFL max dollars, and then your revenue growth from year to year will be shown here. Down below, you can see we have a lot less levy lines. And let me zoom this out a little bit. I don't want to zoom it out too far, you won't be able to read anything, but there we go. So now you can see we have way less levy lines. This is where the 810 was. This used to be non-voted permissible levies. This used to be voted permissible levies. Then ag land, there used to be an emergency here. Now there's only employee benefits. The bottom part is the exact same as it's always been. But your CGFL, your new combined general fund levy rate will be where the 810 was. And you can see in the dollar limit, and I'll zoom in for this, where it used to be a static dollar limit of 810 over here in the top left, right here. Now it is your own personal dollar limit that gets calculated up here, drops down. So I can still put in my 9s to figure my max. And then when I tab out of it, it'll recalculate my max for me at my own personal general fund levy limit. Okay, so that number will change to the max general fund levy dollars. So that still works, and it'll still work on a one-to-one basis. Also, like I was saying before, as long as I've reached my dollar levy limit personally, FICA and IPERS then gets opened up. So I can put dollars here and end up with a rate versus if I'm below it. I'm gonna pray this works. If I'm below the max, oh, I gotta go lower. Make this zeros. So if I'm below it, it will drop my rate out. And they need to fix that. So this will zero out if I'm below my own personal max. Okay, so you gotta be careful to make sure if you're planning on using FICA and IPERS that you do have this a combined general or consolidated general levy maxed out. CGFL has to be at its max. Okay, so that's the changes to the property tax page. Now, to do your notice of public hearing for your proposed
The changes passed on here over the next couple of
And I did talk to Marty, that we're gonna start thinking Thursday probably.
Okay.
or maybe there's
I need to probably change.
I go to participants and.
probably mute them from this side.
All weakness those.
Yep. It's time.
There you go.
Like, Andrew.
It is, don't get drunk with power. So you're going to see changes here that you have to fill this page out first. The changes aren't that big, you know, we'll do most of the calculation for you. You just have to enter it in. You have to have your request filled out here in order for them to populate the new proposed tax levy notice page, which took the place of max levy. So max levy is no more. 384.15A was struck from the Iowa code. So you no longer have to do that process. In place of it, they dropped a new process that comes with its own peculiarities, we'll say. So the new process is we have to have a hearing on our total tax rate. We have to do a mailing beforehand, or we have to get the data to the county auditor, and the county auditor will do a direct mailing to taxpayers beforehand, showing the date of our hearing and our proposed tax rates. against the previous and the effective, just like it was in the max levy. So this, down below, you'll see we still have the 3 columns on the notice. Current year, what are we doing? If we kept current year dollars and moved it forward into the budget year, what would that mean in terms of rate? And then what are we actually proposing? So that didn't change from max levy, except now we're including all of the rates. Okay, you have to have this filled in, this will fill in, excuse me, this will fill in from what you fill in on the property tax page. So unlike max levy, where you had to fill max levy in separately, this, you just fill in your property tax page and it flows here automatically. Okay, no muss, no fuss. Then you have to just enter your city website and your reasons for increase, should you have an increase, just like you did with max levy. And then you'll be able to do a proposed. Now, we haven't changed it, it will say property tax notice proposed. Right now, it's still max levy proposed because we're in process. But once you do that, it will make the data available to your county auditor for them to grab and put in that mailing. So you need to get to this point by no later than March 15th. We would like you to be there at March 5th. Okay, so that's where you need to get ultimately by March 15th to be in compliance with the new mailing law. You also will generate a notice to go in the paper out of this, and this goes to Sarah's question over here of, can I publish this notice before the mailing goes out? Yes, you absolutely can, as long as you stay in your 10 and 20, right? Because this still has a not more than 20, not less than 10 prior day's notice before the hearing. And like I said, we want you to have your hearing no earlier than 5 days after the 20th of March to give the mailing time to make it to its source. Okay, so you need to make sure that you have your timeframes in your head correctly so that if you do publish this before the mailing goes out, that you don't hold your hearing too early, right? Because we wouldn't want to hold a hearing on March 20th when the mailing is going out on March 20th. Then we're just burning taxpayer money and it's kind of a waste of time, right? And we want to have it after to make sure that we've upheld the spirit of the law. Yeah.
So when you do that proposed, that's all we have to do to get it to the auditor.
Yep. Yep.
And drop anything off.
Because in our system, and I'll show you the sidebar here, so you won't see the sidebar, this is just for admins and for county. But in the sidebar, there's this valuation section that your county will have. Currently, they have a county totals page where they can come and download their total valuation that they input to our system so they can double check. We're gonna put in another tab or another page right here that will say mailing notice data. And they will come in here, select their county, select the appropriate year, and they'll be able to download all of the data they need by tax district to go right into the mailing. And then their system will create the mailing. You don't do anything beyond getting your data in here in a timely fashion. So as long as you get your data in here in a timely fashion, you're gonna be just fine. And it's on the county auditor's back from there. And believe me, they're thrilled about that. So be nice to your county auditor. They're gonna be doing a lot of extra work this year to get this done. So that's kind of the mailing piece to start.
So Ted,
Yeah.
just to clarify,
Mhm.
we have to send the piece into the county auditors by March 5th that sets, the rate.
Mhm.
But when we're publishing, are we just publishing for our own budget or are we publishing?
Just for your own, yeah.
Okay.
You don't have to include all 3 pieces that are gonna be on the mailer.
And that's just, that notice kind of takes the place of.
Of the max levy.
Of the max
Yeah,
levy.
yeah.
So you're still
Yeah.
having those 2 hearings, one on the rate and then one for the budget.
Yep. So let's go through that notice process in detail now. So we've mentioned it a little bit. The mailer that goes out, as I mentioned earlier, so there's gonna be a direct mailing to every property taxpayer in your city. That will have the time, date, location, and proposed rates and dollars for your city, the county budget, and the school budget, the appropriate school budget. So if you're in a city that is split school districts, so you have 2 or more school districts inside your city lines, the mailing that's gonna go out, there will be, the same variation of mailings as there are school districts. So if you have 3 different school districts operating inside your city, there will be 3 different types of mailings that go out with 3 different rates on them. Because the school will change on each of those mailings depending on which school district the taxpayer is in. So it can get complicated, right? Your city of West Des Moines, they have, I think it's 3 or 4 different school districts and they're in 4 different counties. So I think it's actually like 6 school districts and they're in 4 different counties. So they're gonna have like 24 different variations of mailing that will go out depending on where the taxpayer lives in the city. So this could get very complicated. Now, the good news is that you're not gonna have any complication for that mailing on your end because the mailing itself is handled by the county. We give them all of the information they need. We fill in most of your information. The only thing you have to give us is rates, date, time, place. right? So you have to do your proposed for 25. You have to give us your time, date, and place of when it's gonna be held. We'll grab all of that together and throw it at the county auditor through our online system. There will be no direct communication between you and the county auditor, other than if you wanna tell them, hey, I've submitted and it's in the system. You can, great. You don't have to. Our system will let them know. Okay, so you guys don't have to email them any data, you don't have to hand them any data, it'll all flow through our system, you just gotta make sure that you have it filled out in a timely fashion. Okay, again, they have to mail that on March 20th. You have to have it in no later than March 15th, we want you to have it in by March 5th to give them the proper amount of runway to get this done. Right, March 15th to March 20th, is gonna be very tight, and their vendors are telling them nigh impossible. So we wanna make sure they have time to get this done and everybody fulfills the purpose. So here's the list of items that will be on that mailer and on your hearing notice. I have put behind the ones that we provide. So we provide the current year tax rates in dollars, because we have your 24 budgets in our system. We don't need you to reinvent the wheel. We'll just grab it and put it in, just like we did for max levy. We always brought prior year in. You're gonna have to provide us with your proposed rates in dollars for the next year. You're gonna have to provide us with any statement of increase. Why was it increasing? You know, same as you did on max levy. What was the reason for the increase? You'll have to provide us with your web address if you're going to have, if you have a city website or if you have social media presence. Just like the max levy, your notice of public hearing that gets published also has to go to your city website and your social media on the same day that it goes into the paper. It can go in before, you can have it on your website a week before that, that's fine, but it at least has to be out there the day that it hits the newspaper or gets posted within your city. Same rules apply, less than 200 or less, 200 or less in population, you post in 3 places, 201 and above in population as of the last official census you publish. And again, not less than 10, not more than 20 days prior to the date of your hearing, and we want you to have your hearing at least 5 days after the mailing date of March 20. Okay, we will provide, there's also a tax impact statement that has to be at the bottom, which says for a residential and commercial property of $100,000, what will this mean in terms of real dollars paid? What's the change? We'll calculate that. You don't add that, you just give us the rates and we'll figure that out. Okay, and it'll be put on there. And then we'll do all of the percentages of change from this year to the next. You have to provide us time, date, and place. Okay, so most of this we give to you. You have to provide us with rates, reasons, time, date, and place. And then you have to have it in our system. Okay. Right. So the mailing, like I said, will include 3 different pieces of information. It'll include, this is an example that we have off of our current format of the mailer. DOM is also in charge of formatting the mailing that goes out. So we have a mailing formatted that'll be a front and a back, 1 page that'll go to each taxpayer for each tax address that they have. So if you have somebody who owns multiple addresses throughout your city, they're gonna get 1 for every single address, basically, more or less. Okay. If you have someone who owns ag land inside your city, they will get 1 for each different individual parcel. Right. So if you have somebody who owns 100 acres inside your city for ag land, they might get 10, 20, 30, I don't know, depends on how your audit or your assessor broke them out. Okay, but be prepared for that question. They should all be the exact same, which is kind of lame. And counties will try to control that as much as possible so we don't have those duplicative mailings because it costs money for them to mail them too. So they're going to try to limit that as much as possible, but be aware that that is out there. Multiple unit owners may get multiple statements. Be prepared for the question of what does all this mean? They should all be the exact same unless they're in a different county or in a different city if you're in a split. Okay. The information is going to be exactly as it's shown here. So your meeting information will be on top, date, time, location, telephone number, internet details of your posting, or if you are doing a live meeting or a web meeting, excuse me. In addition to your live meeting, down below will be the reasons you've exceeded, and then in the middle is all of that data you filled in and we filled in about here's what we are this year, here's what would happen if we took this year's dollars to next year, here's what we're actually proposing for next year, and then the equal changes. So there will be 1 for school, county, and city, all on the same page. And then there will also be on the back of that, we have to provide a breakdown of the FY24 taxes and where all of the tax dollars that a citizen paid went, who got what share. This is just like what is on the tax statement that you get to pay. Right on the back, it says 40% went to the school, 30% went to the city, 10% or 15% went to the county, and then the remaining 15% went to everybody else. Right, so this will mirror that essentially, but it's required to be on that mailing, so it'll be on the back of that original mailing, And then also on that mailing, we have to provide, just like in your published notice, a statement of $100,000 residential property, $100,000 commercial property. What is the change in terms of real dollars paid? Right? So that we'll do those calculations. So this piece where it's the breakout, and this piece where it's the statement of change for the taxpayer to $100,000 value property, we will make those calculations and provide those for you. You don't need to do anything except for give us your rates. Yeah.
Is there any way to add prior year?
Prior
into
years.
these? Well, I mean, like, the percentage share or their tax rate for prior years, so
Well-
they can track.
The percentage share is going to be for prior year. So it won't be for budget 25 because we don't know the rates. It'll be for 24, which we're in.
Right.
So they'll have that to track, and then they can take next year, which will be 25, and compare it. And then this one will show current year 24 versus proposed 25.
Okay.
So that they can, and then the difference percentage here is the difference between 24 current and 25 proposed. That'll be the difference that we're calculating. So yes, it will show prior year. Yeah. And that's by code. That's not something we're throwing in there. Code requires it. Okay. That's on the mailing piece. So that's kind of step one. Like I said earlier, and like it was alluded to earlier, there's also that notice that you have to have published or posted, which is in our system that we looked at. Again, that will generate, just like it did for max levy, it'll generate the notice that you send to the paper in PDF form. None of that changes really. Just make sure that you have this done not less than 10, not more than 20 days prior to the date of the hearing. And again, so let's talk about the hearing. This is a unique hearing, this proposed tax rate hearing, because just like the max levy, we're having a hearing only on the tax rate. Like that part's the exact same, except for now it's on the total city rate and not just that sub portion, okay? But you still have to have a hearing. The change is, this has to be at a separate and distinct meeting all on its own. There can be no other city business discussed at this meeting. The only agenda item, and it gets its own agenda, its own notice, its own minutes. The only agenda item is hearing for the proposed FY 25 property tax levy. That's it. So that's your agenda, okay? That's the only thing that can be discussed there, unless there's like, you may have to provide some explanation of your budget in a little more detail when talking about the rate, but you can't go into other extraneous city business. All right, this has to be separate and distinct. Now, the good news is there's nothing in the code that prevents you from doing this on the same night as another meeting. And that's going to become crucial for you once a month, folks, right? If you're once a month, you're going to have to do this meeting on the same night as kind of a regular council meeting, at which time you can then set the hearing date for your budget adoption hearing, because you cannot set your budget adoption hearing date until this hearing has been held. Okay, so you have to do this hearing first, then you would do another meeting after this meeting. So this one is so distinct, like you have to have, it's got to have its own agenda, its own postings, its own publication. You open the meeting, you hold the hearing, you close the meeting, just like you would any normal meeting. Then you want to wait a little period of time and then open a new meeting after that, which would be your normal city council meeting. And then there you would set your time, date, and place for your budget adoption hearing that has to happen at a subsequent hearing to this. So you can see from that where you're going to have your time squeeze. This has to happen after March 20th, and you have to have two hearings between basically March 25th and April 30th. More likely April 29th, because I don't want you doing a hearing on the 30th. You have to have it in the auditor's office, not later than April 30th. So you're gonna have to have your hearings done by the 29th. Okay, so you've got from March 25th, essentially, through April 29th to hold two hearings with proper notice for each. Okay. All right, and again, here's the statement. It has to be standalone. The good news there is, it's just a hearing, no resolutions required out of it. Max levy, you had to pass a resolution adopting the max levy. There's no such language in this code that you have to pass a resolution. There's no action item that has to happen. You just have to have the hearing, open and close it, take in the comment, and then you can make the decision for the budget adoption. Yeah.
If no one shows up, how long should you keep it open?
A reasonable amount of time, it doesn't have to be open for an hour, but it also should be open more than 3 minutes.
We always go with 15.
15 is
We
a
just
great
keep
number.
A timer going anytime we have a public hearing. I didn't know if that was.
That's fantastic. 15 is the number I would give. There is no set number. If you go 30 seconds and close it, that's dumb, but you can do it. It's gonna cause you problems because someone will show up in a minute and be like, what the heck? You're just trying to hide things, Don't do that to yourself. Be transparent, but 15 minutes is a good number. 10 minutes might be sufficient in small towns.
Do you have to set the budget hearing date by resolution? I forget.
You do not.
Okay.
It's best probably to set it by resolution, but if you do it by motion, that's A-okay. It just has to be set in open hearing or an open meeting, not open hearing, but open meeting. That's the most important thing, so that everybody in the community is aware of what's going on.
So we can set the separate meeting, we can have 2 meetings in a row, if you're 1 time a month.
Yeah, so like on the same night, you could have 2
So
meetings.
we can adjourn and then the mayor will say, now we'll start
I would provide a little time between them,
Okay.
just so you can prove they're separate and distinct, because if you go from one directly into another, someone could argue that's 1 meeting.
okay.
Give it a 5-minute break, then open the new meeting, and away you go. Just as long as there's a break in the action where people can shuffle in and out, there's no way someone could call that one contiguous meeting, right? So avoid the problem. It's not to say that if you close one down and then you open the next one appropriately right after it, it's still 2 separate and distinct meetings, but you could get into a confrontation about how someone thinks it's one contiguous. So just leave some elbow room between the 2 and then go on, 10, 15 minutes.
And there should be no repercussions if we have that new hearing on the 25th. And our whole town says, none of us have gotten our mailer yet.
There
I
is
mean, as
a,
long as we made the attempt and it was in the paper.
yep, there is a provision in the code that states a failure of a citizen to get the mailing does not make it an invalid mailing.
Okay,
So as long as we can prove you hit all of your timelines, and that's why it's in our system, and that's why we're tracking it that way, is I can prove when you did your notice, the county can prove when they pulled it, and then the county can prove through their mailing services when the mailers went out. If we hit all of those goalposts, you're in the clear, even if
Okay.
no one in your city gets their mailer.
okay.
I have a question.
Yeah,
So with this new way,
yes,
if you have your hearing, your first hearing,
Mhm.
and you get comments.
yeah,
So then they say, okay, we need to cut it by 5%.
you
So-
still can.
You cut it by 5%.
At the budget adoption, you can,
Okay,
or when you set even in that next meeting, you could say, we're gonna do our hearing on this date and we're gonna publish a notice for 5% less than was proposed in the hearing. Or something like, you
okay,
have time to make those changes. And you can even do that the night of the budget adoption. So you could publish a budget adoption that was higher than what you actually adopt. You just can't publish one that's lower than what you actually adopt. So yeah, you still have time to make those changes.
Okay.
Good question.
So can you go ahead and, I believe before you could always do like your budget hearing, say at 6:55, and
Yeah.
then at 7 you adopt the budget at the regular meeting? Can you do that or?
Well, the budget adoption rules didn't change.
Okay.
So your budget adoption hearing or your budget adoption hearing and resolution adopting the budget are the same as they always were.
You can do them on the same.
You can do them in basically the same meeting, right?
Yeah.
Because you recess the meeting, you go into your hearing, you have your hearing, you close your hearing, you come back in the meeting, and then you approve it. Is normally the way it works. That still applies for the budget adoption. The thing that has to be separate and distinct is this rate hearing. All on its own, in its own little island, nothing else discussed. We're focusing on rate at that meeting. But you can have multiple hearings on that date, or multiple meetings on that date. That's the thing to remember. So that'll help you with your time frame. Otherwise, you'd have to like have it on one day, wait a day, and then have another, and that would be harder. It wouldn't quite be chaos yet, but it'd be getting there, right? The notice also, remember, just like with max levy, has to go on your website and your social media the day it's published, and in a slight change, max levy, we had to keep the resolution approving the max levy forever. Now you have to keep the hearing notice forever because there's no resolution, right? So now, once you've done the hearing notice for this proposed tax levy hearing, you have to keep that on your website forever and ever and ever.
And if you don't have a website,
Then you don't have to do this. I would still keep it in your office on file in case somebody comes and asks, but no, there's no requirement for you to get a website or a social media presence. Again, social media rules apply, same as they did for max levy. So if I have social media accounts for my city, I've got to have a link out there to where it's posted on my website the same day it comes out in the paper.
Is the publication, is it the 10/20 or 4/20?
10 and 20. Anything budget related is always 10 and 20. Anything budget related is always 10 and 20. Thank God they did not change that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everybody'd be thrown off. But yeah, it's 10 and 20 if it's budget related. Everything else basically is 4 and 20, with a few exceptions. Okay. Okay. And here's the slide for you. Budget process doesn't change. And I'll make these slides available for you after the fact. So that you can get them from ECI here, or you can get them from me. Okay. All right. Couple of other parts of the bill that I wanted to go over, because they don't directly impact your budget. But they're kind of side along, right? They'll have an impact. I shouldn't say they will directly impact your budget, but it's not a way that you deal with. You're not gonna have any tangible changes that you have to make because of this. The Division 5 of the bill instituted a homestead exemption, which is something brand new that we've never had. We've always had homestead credit, right? You have a homestead, you get a credit on your taxes paid I forget how many dollars, I'm blanking on how many dollars it is, but you get a credit on taxes paid, so you pay less tax, right? That's the credit. That's still there. Everybody gets that in loans at home. Now, if you're 65 or older, going into the next fiscal year, you also get an exemption on your property. So we take value and we get rid of that value. Because remember, a credit is when your tax statement gets adjusted. An exemption is when we adjust the actual value on which we're taxing. Okay, so we're gonna get an exemption on homesteads for anyone 65 and over who's the owner. For FY25, it's gonna be half of what it will end up being. It'll be $3,250 worth of value is exempted. So if I had a home that was worth $100,000, it would now be worth $96,750, right? We would remove that $3,250 off the assessed value, okay? And off the taxable value. Starting in FY26, it rolled up to its full amount of $6,500 reduction, which will go on forever. And again, this is for anyone 65 and over. So you might want to get a handle on what that number is for your city now. Your assessor should be able to help you because they should have that now. Because that already started being collected in July. Another thing that changed that was already in place, it just changed in orders of magnitude, is the military exemption. So anyone who is a military service member gets another additional exemption on their home. This hadn't been changed for years and years, so this is actually a pretty logical change. It used to be $1,852 of value exempted out of their home value that you couldn't tax on. Now that's going to increase it to $4,000 a year. That gets exempted off of their value. So if you have someone who has a homestead and a military exemption, next year it's going to be $7,250 worth of value removed. After that, it'll be a little over $10,000 worth of value removed off of their property at the start of the calculation of taxes. Okay, so bear in mind that will affect you on the budget because that will have the effect of lowering that non-tip taxable value because we're going to remove value from the taxing system. All right. All right. Like I said, this week I'll release a sample budget timeline, and I had someone request me doing a single monthly meeting and then a 2 meeting a month version. I'll try to do that. Hopefully I will get back to my office at some point and do work. I feel like I'm just running around the countryside right now, but I'll get that done. And I'll get the CGFL estimation tool that I showed you earlier, where it gives you the 4 years of estimation. I'll release that too by the end of the week. Yeah.
Another question. So, for example,
Yeah.
if you kind of know when your public hearing is gonna be,
Yeah.
even though the council hasn't said it yet,
Yeah.
can you still send that notice to the paper if the notice is gonna get to the paper, but it won't be published
You may have
before
to
they
play,
set it?
you may
If
have to
it's-
play some of those timing games.
Okay.
Yeah,
If
there's
we send
nothing-
it on Friday and they don't set it till Monday, but. if
there's
it's
nothing that
April
prevents you,
Wednesday,
as long as it comes out in the paper after they
it's
approved
set,
it,
then that's fine.
you're still legally okay.
Okay.
What I've done is just say, I need you to hold a piece this big, because our paper always wants 4 to 5 days.
You can, yeah, you can,
Pull a section about this big for my public.
or give them the example notice.
Right.
And tell them to shred it, because otherwise they're gonna publish that one. But you can give them like the example notice to say, here's the whole need, and I will provide it to you the minute it's published. Because then they still can align their paper, you know, that's an option. But you could, like, let's say you have a Thursday deadline.
Yeah.
To get that notice in the paper next Wednesday,
Right,
and your council's meeting on Tuesday
yeah,
of the next week.
yeah.
You could get it to them ahead of time because it's gonna come into the paper on Wednesday and it's gonna be approved on Tuesday. So it came in after it was
As long
approved.
as, as long as it's after they've actually approved.
And that's really no different than like in the metro areas, Gazette, Register, we can get that kind of 1 day turnaround time. So it's really no different than that. Des Moines City Council could approve approve their due date on a Tuesday and have it in the paper on Thursday. Like that
Because I mean,
can
they're gonna
happen.
approve what we tell them, what date and time we tell them to approve anyway, so.
But it leaves absolutely no room for any error.
Yes.
Whatsoever.
That's the big
Now, if
takeaway.
you make any, you have to be 100%, and that's.
Except for the errors outside of your control. Right? We still have extension
We're still
provisions.
people, we still make mistakes.
Right, but we still have extension provisions. So you can, if your news, the big problem is newspapers right now, right? Their publication has gone downhill. That's no easy way to put it. And then the bigger the paper, the worse it's gotten, right? It's not the small rural ones, they're doing fine. It's your Gannett publications and your other consolidated publications where it's their nationwide papers. Suddenly now we're doing our legals out of Wisconsin and they don't know what our laws are and they don't care. They're in Wisconsin, who cares? So we get a lot of bad publications in the bigger papers. Watch for that. But if that happens, we still have the ability to extend you because that's outside of your control. Yeah.
The other thing is like the. Harold does a Monday electronic version, and the Monday electronic version doesn't count as public.
It doesn't. It has to be paper in hands. Yeah, to count.
So can you set the date for the tax rate and the budget on the
No.
same night?
Because you cannot set the budget adoption hearing date until after you've had your hearing for your budget. You have to hold that hearing first, and then you can set the budget adoption. Same as the max limit. That part has not changed. But you can set, in December, you could set your hearing for the property levy notice, or the property levy. So, like, you can set that way out, but you have to wait until that hearing is done in order to do your setting of your hearing date for your budget adoption. Same as max levy.
And because you can't discuss anything else, you can't have that public hearing.
You can't set it at that same meeting. You have to have a subsequent meeting, correct? That's why I hit that so hard that you can do it on the same night. You just have to have two separate and distinct meetings. Okay? Yeah.
So in theory, if we moved our monthly meeting to March 25th, we set the public hearing notice of this new CGL.
CGFL.
Thank you, 6 o'clock, and then I set a regular regular meeting at 6:30. Then I approve at 6:30 after the other public hearing is done. Still could have it as a regular meeting, set the date for in April.
Yep.
So I can get to the newspaper,
Nothing
so I
is
don't
preventing it.
necessarily have to have a special meeting. If I move my March one to March 20th.
I would prepare yourself for a special meeting.
But it could.
But in theory, you could time it out perfect depending on at what time of the month your meetings are. If you have late in the month meetings, you might not need a special. There is a scenario under which you could get it all done and be okay. But if you have mid to early in the month meetings, you're gonna have a special. I'll tell you that straight up right now. Just break the bad.
Couldn't we just change the date of the meeting to?
You absolutely could move your regular meeting date for that 1 month. 100%. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you take the
Well,
proper
it'd probably be
steps.
2 months, because then you gotta wait,
Depends.
potentially, depending on when that notice
It
gets
depends
in.
on, again, if you're in the mid-April, you might be okay to hold your regular date.
Mhm.
But yeah, you may have to move 2 monthly meetings, March and April, potentially. And you can do that as long as you follow the proper procedure.
Do you have to do anything at a meeting to set the proposed tax rate hearing, or is that only done?
Yes,
You have to do that at the prior meeting. to
yep,
set
at least one meeting prior. And that's why I think, like, you could set that in December if you wanted to.
Right.
As if you know your date when you're gonna do
So
it,
we just set that.
like in
before March,
February. At the February meeting, you'll set that.
February regular meeting, we can set it for the
Yep.
rate meeting.
Yep, so the way that it would kind of work is, all right, budget forms will come out in early December. Value will come out by January 1. At that point, you can start putting your rate package together in our system. You will, by February, probably have your rates figured out. You'll set your hearing date at that February meeting for your property tax hearing
That is what you said.
for your March meeting. And like we said, you may have to have a special March meeting, or you may have to move your March meeting to get it beyond the mailing date. Then you'll hold your hearing. You'll have a subsequent meeting after that hearing, same night, set your budget adoption hearing date, then hold your budget adoption hearing in April, potentially a special, or move your hearing date, move your meeting date again. That's kind of the outline broadly.
When you set it in February, do you do it by motion or should it be by resolution?
Either way. Yep, that's another one, doesn't matter. As long as it's done in an open meeting, that's what really matters. Yeah.
So you hold your special meeting, you have your public hearing, you close your meeting. Do you have to actually then approve that tax rate or just hold the hearing?
Nope.
So
Hold the
you
hearing.
hold the hearing and then.
No resolution on this one. Max levy, you had to pass a resolution at the end of it. That's gone.
Okay, so we don't have to pass anything and
Nope.
then open up the new separate meeting. Have
Set
that
your
meeting
hearing, set your budget adoption hearing
Do we have
date.
to publish a public hearing then? Have a public hearing for your budget adoption as
Yes,
well?
that
Okay.
doesn't change. Nothing
Right,
about
so
budget
that's the
adoption
same.
has changed.
Okay, so then you could, and that next one, you're gonna say, okay, there's a public hearing, then you publish that, you
Yep.
have a public hearing.
Yep.
And then you adopt your budget.
Yep. Yep, yep, nothing about the budget adoption meeting has changed. You still have to set it, notice it and hear it, same as always. And then that requires a resolution at the end of it, adopting your full budget, same as it always has. Okay, so make sure that you pass that resolution. Okay, at the end of your budget adoption hearing, we need a budget adoption resolution. The resolution that goes away is that quasi max levy one that you used to have to do. Now you just have to hold a hearing on your rates and not do any resolution on that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Have to deal with that.
Okay, so like I said, I'll have these two tools out this week by Friday. I will email them, but then it will also be posted to our website once I'm done, dom.iowa.gov/cities, our normal forms website. And then we have a couple of other changes I wanted to hit in the bill. These are not really property tax related. They're just ones that I want you to keep in mind because they are changes that will affect you as a city. So I figured I'd hit them again. You'll hear these probably multiple times again. But we'll go through these relatively quickly because they are not budget dependent. These are outside of the budget process, but they're things you need to start thinking about. And a lot of these have delayed implementation. So they're not going to go into play this year. It'll be a year or two from now. So you can start thinking about them, but they're not necessarily going to be on your plate right away. So urban revitalization, which again is chapter 404. This is not TIF. This is your property tax abatements where you give someone a break from property taxes for a certain period of time on a new construction or a new improvement. That's what we're talking about here, chapter 404, not tax rebates, chapter 403 TIF, okay? Any new commercial abatement agreement that you're going to make under chapter 404 has to have a minimum assessment agreement. Has to by law, starting in FY27. Urban revitalization, which includes residential property, starting in FY27. Used to be you could abate 100% of the property taxes on that improvement. Now you're not going to be able to abate 100%. School rate will still apply. The full school rate will still apply. So instead of abating, $42 per thousand off of their tax rate, you'll abate, 42 minus the school, and the school will still stay. So if your school has a rate of $18 per thousand, that will still apply, and they'll still have to pay taxes on that $18 per thousand, starting in FY27. Okay, but that's only in 404 areas will that apply. All right, and it's only on new contracts, so new abatement agreements starting after July 1, that were struck after July 1 of 2024. Yeah.
I was just getting this might be a city attorney question. Were you suggesting change to our ordinances if we have 404 included in them?
I would talk to the city attorney. You might not necessarily have to change, but you'll have to probably change, like if you have an application, change the statement on it because you're no longer going to be able to abate 100% of their taxes. That's the big change, right? Nothing else has to change about your scale. It's just 100% of the taxes less the school levy each year is kind of how you could word it. But you might want to review those and see if because if you specifically call out anywhere in your ordinances that they'll get 100% abatement, that will probably need to be adjusted. Okay, starting July 1, 2024. All right, so delayed implementation doesn't directly impact your budget. It will impact school budgets in a positive way. City debt issuance is changing as well. You've probably already been made aware of this through other channels, league and the like. They're taking away this bill takes away the city's ability to kind of glom onto special elections, the whole bond election. So it used to be there were different times throughout the year when you could hold a bond election, or you could, usually get on with any of the special school elections that they had. That's gone away. Now you can only do regular November elections. So if you're going to plan a bond issuance, and this is general corporate purpose bond issuances that have the voting thresholds that are affected here, Or if you get reverse referendum on a essential corporate purpose and you have to take it to a vote, you can now only do that in November. Guys, you have to plan accordingly with your bond issuances. The bond attorneys are all aware of this, so they should help you out with the calendar. But just know that if you have to put it to a vote, it has to now go to a November election only. No way to do it in March or June or any of the other ones. Okay, and then you have to put an impact statement in your bond, your published bond notice in the paper that states the actual impact on the tax rate that will occur because of this issuance. Okay, so just bear that in mind. It may be 0, and it has to be on a property of $100,000, a residential property with an actual value of $100,000. What would be the tangible change to their taxes because of this debt issuance that you're proposing? All right, again, bond councils are going to be key there. But if you're a city that doesn't use a bond council when you issue debt, you have to be very sensitive to this because you have now more hurdles to get across in a longer time frame on any general corporate purpose issuance. Okay. All right, and those general corporate purpose issuance levels are going to change. We'll talk about that on the next slide. I want to make sure I had it in here. Another change that's coming probably next year, it actually doesn't come in until the FY25 AFR by code, but we've got money now, so we'll probably put it in for 24 before my money runs away. The AFR is going to be expanded in the other P10 pages to what you have to give us in terms of debt information. Under the code, we now have to make a report to the we being DOM, we have to make a report to the legislature every year on local government, city and county debt issuance, where it stands, how it came about, what amount is still out there, what they're using it for. So we have a bunch of items listed up here that we have to collect. So it's items that, a lot of these are items we've never collected before. So I can't just like drag them off of the long-term debt schedule of the budget. We'll have to actually implement changes in the AFR to grab these. The big changes here that you will never complete it. Well, first, the big change from AFR is right now, on other P10, you kind of aggregate all of your debts together and report them by category. That'll go away and you'll have to make an itemized list just like you do on the long-term debt page of the budget. That won't be that big of a change. You guys already do that. The big changes will be that we have to now start collecting information about the purpose of the debt. Why did you take it on? What did it do? How was it approved? Was it approved just by a vote of the council? Did it have to go to a vote? Was it under threshold and it didn't need a vote? All of that various information. We have to get the date of issuance, the amount of issuance, and then again, the amount outstanding, the amount paid for the year, specifically in principal and interest for those debts. So it'll be a lot like the long-term debt schedule that you do on the budget, but it'll have a couple of pieces that will be different. So start tracking that information. Make sure you have that information in a good format to give us, how was this passed? Was it a vote? Was it a council vote? Was it a general corporate purpose that was below threshold, so it didn't have to be voted on? We need all of that information. And then we also need all of the information on what did you do with the money? That's the pieces that you don't normally track for the budget that you'll now need to start tracking for the AFR.
What do they want to do if you do a refund?
Well, your purpose would be refunding. Refunding X that paid for this. I'm still working on how I'm going to fit all of that narrative on a page. So that's going to be interesting. We'll see. That's still that'll come out next year in July. I'm just giving you this information now so you can start tracking those debt issuances and the pieces of information that we are going to need to make your next July much easier. Like I said, the thresholds for general corporate purpose, when you have to go to a vote, also changed, and they changed in a good direction. These actually went up because they hadn't been changed since like 1993. So now for a population of 5,000 or less, you have to go to a vote on a general corporate purpose issuance if you're over $520,000 in principal. For 5,000 to 75K in population, it's 910,000 in principal, and for over 75,000, it's 1.3 million in principal. You'd have to take it, anything above that, you'd have to take it to a vote of the people. Below that, you can issue it without a vote, subject to referendum. Okay. The added wrinkle here is DOM's been given the responsibility to refigure these numbers every year based on CPI. So as the consumer price index goes up, your threshold will go up. As this consumer price index goes down, as if that would ever happen, your threshold would go down. Okay, so we'll recalculate that every January, starting with January 1, 2025. You'll have to come to our website before you do an issuance and make sure of the new thresholds, because they will not be placed in code. They will not be part of the code language in the Iowa laws. We will just issue a release, is the way that the code puts it, is we have to release that information. And the way we'll do that is by posting it on our website every January. Okay, and then we have to report, like I said earlier, we have to report on debt to the General Assembly each December 1. That's gonna be problematic because AFRs are due on December 1, so I don't know how we're gonna do that. I guess I'm getting a time machine too, so we'll figure that out, but try to have your AFRs done timely, I guess is my ask to you. So that I can potentially get that done. Okay, another piece that is not currently, it's not currently in place and it doesn't have an impact right away, but you need to keep your eye on it because of what it might mean in terms of its implied impact. We, under this bill, starting with FY 26, so AY 24, so the value that's coming up this next January, we have to start collecting the assessed and taxable value in terms of how much of it is revalued existing property and how much of it is new property in each tax district, so in your city. Now, there's nothing in the code about what we're gonna do with this information. Right now, we just collect it. That's it. But that implication is they're gonna take a look at it and possibly make new tax policy based on the breakout of revalue to new construction. Because there's always the flavor of all of the property tax proposals over the last number of years is how do we protect current homeowners from giant leaps in valuation that come from revalue? Okay, so if they get the revalue property values separated out, that could have tax policy implications. As of right now, there is no specific proposal, but I'm just warning you that this is gonna be collected and it could be the basis of further changes to the tax system. So just keep your ears open, keep your eyes open. You're not getting the League Weekly or their legislative briefings during the legislative season that come out on Fridays. Make sure you get signed up for those so that you'll be aware of any future impacts or any future changes.
When they look at the revalues, are they also looking at the rollbacks?
That may come into the discussion. I don't know yet.
I mean, if you look at the revalues really don't mean a whole, I mean, they mean something, but when it gets to the property tax and the budget, we still have the rollback.
Well, the revalues set the rollback. So that's kind of the relationship there. So if they have the revalues separated out in terms of taxable and assessed, they might do something with rollback, or they might do something with property tax, or they might just sit on it and say, that's interesting. I don't know. But any of those are on the table at that point. So they could monkey with rollback, they could monkey with taxes, or they could just stay with income tax and leave me alone. Hopefully they choose to work free. Okay. All right, any questions on any of that? It's a lot to take in. You'll hear it again next week.
I have one quick question,
Yeah.
and maybe I just think this up. On your slide with the AFR for the long-term debt,
Mhm.
was there something that we were gonna have to put like the amount, like the percentage?
I'll have to go back and look at it. I don't know that it was 5%. It was just what is the purposes.
No, like our interest rates.
Oh, yeah. So that
Okay,
will
like our
be
low and high.
just a low and high. So like it's
Okay.
presented in your audit, if you get audited, the auditor's office puts in over the life cycle of the debt. So we're not talking about what's left. We're talking about the entire debt. What was the lowest percentage of interest? What was the highest percentage of
And
interest? Yeah,
but that's on this.
that will be included.
Okay.
Correct.
I thought it was.
But yeah, no, you didn't.
That's a hard thing to make up.
You didn't. That one you already have, so I'm not worried about. I'm trying to get the pieces that you're
Okay.
gonna have to track separately
Okay.
that are gonna be more problematic. But yes, that will also be in it.
Okay.
The amount of interest that you're paying, so your coupon rate. What was the lowest in this debt? You know, if you have a 20-year debt, out of those 20 years, what was the lowest interest rate paid? What was the highest interest rate you will potentially pay? Because usually highest is on the tail end.
Okay.
So you're usually grabbing first year last year. That's the way it usually works. Unless you got a really weird negotiation with that. All right, any other questions? Otherwise, there's my contact info. Your brownfields lady made me feel bad. I have cards that I never use, so I put my cards down on the table too. Basically, just to get rid of some out of my backpack. Take them, don't take them, I don't care. But that also has my contact info on it if you need it. I don't hide, so I'm easy to find. I couldn't hide if I wanted to. I've tried. It doesn't work.
He's
So,
very responsive.
yeah, well, not right now. There's probably people in this room waiting on an email from me. I'm sorry. I've been having a tour. Been having a tour across the countryside.
Yes, that was my question for you.
Not yesterday.
Oh,
You
yeah.
emailed me 2 times.
Fair enough, not yesterday. Not yesterday, but I had other things come up yesterday. When I'm in office, then my powers that be above me want to talk to me. Yeah, I don't know. Try to tell your boss you don't have time to talk. Doesn't go over well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't have anything else other than I can't take full credit for this agenda. Aaron Warren from Manchester, Delaware, gave me the idea of this head. So if you guys ever have any ideas for topics, let me know. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for lunch.
You are welcome.
And the topics. Really bad.